Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about what I think some of the best exercises are to build a deadlift. Now, I want to state here that I'm not saying that these are supplemental lifts in the traditional sense, and I'm not talking about weak point training for more advanced lifters. I'm talking about someone who just says, look, I'm fairly new to training. I want to build a big deadlift, and as you said, just working the deadlift isn't always the most efficient way to do that. So these are the exercises that you could use to, say, get your deadlift up to 450, 500 pounds probably, without having to focus entirely on training the deadlift all the time. And what we're looking for is to build the musculature of the deadlift, to build all the muscles involved, because quite frankly, as I've said many times, just training the deadlift itself is the slow way to actually build the muscles of the deadlift. It's not a particularly great hypertrophy exercise. Phenomenal test of strength. It's a phenomenal way to learn how to build maximum strength. But the deadlift itself, and again, we're talking about the conventional deadlift, it's very, very difficult to recover from relative to the amount of muscle growth that it stimulates. And I obviously deadlift still and recommend that everyone deadlift. So let's kind of break these things down. Now you're going to see me doing three different exercises in here, and these are all somewhat variations that might require specific equipment, but the idea is the same. First of all, you saw me doing a good morning, and now you saw those with a safety squat bar. That actually puts more focus on the upper back, middle back, all of those things. But what I would say is that the good morning itself is one of the foundational exercises for the deadlift. And the reason I say that is that it's a hip hinge, which you can do very, very large amounts of volume of. And the reason you can do a lot of volume on it is because it puts the weight farther up on the top of the back, on the shoulders, depending upon exactly what bar and bar position you use. And it's still a hip hinge. And the reason we can do so much volume on it is it just doesn't compress the spine that much. Most of your hip hinge exercises, at least if you're working hard, not doing ultra high reps, you're going to use a lot of weight on them because they're generally deadlift variations. And what ends up happening is that they put a lot of axial loading on you. And even if it's something easier like a Romanian deadlift, the problem with that is that you can only do so much volume before it runs into a recovery issue. The good morning is phenomenal for, first of all, building hamstring mobility, but letting us do a lot of work that works all the erectors, works the glutes, works the hamstrings, in which we can maximally hypertrophy most of these areas. And if not maximally, then very effectively, and particularly the erectors. And when you start using something like I have here, a safety squat bar, it becomes even more difficult because the center of gravity gets pulled further up, forced to use even less weight, and done correctly, you end up rounding the upper back. So again, for anyone with an upper and middle back weakness in their deadlift, that will correct it very, very quickly. Up next, I would also say that some sort of direct hamstring work is probably a good idea. Now, in this case, I'm doing the glute ham raise on a glute ham device. This is arguably, in my opinion, the best hamstring builder of all time. And it has to do with the fact that just like a hamstring curl does, we're actually bending the knee on it. When we do hip hinges to build the hamstrings, only 2 out of the 3 heads of the hamstrings can be fully recruited with a hip hinge. And you require, again, flexion of the knee to work all 3 heads. Well, that exercise works all 3 heads. And it does so in a way that moves your body through space, also trains the low back, the glutes to some extent, although not as much as, say, the good morning would. But again, I feel like it's the best option. But if you don't have that, and again, you're trying to build your deadlift up, it wouldn't be a bad idea to throw in some hamstring curls, right? On a hamstring curl machine. And I'm not a big fan of machines, but in the case of that, if you don't have a proper way to do a glute ham device, or you can't safely do some sort of Nordic hamstring curl, which again aren't always safe for everyone to do, particularly depending upon your strength level versus body weight, then you may need to resort to the machine, or you could actually use bands. There are ways that you can lay down across a bench and do hamstring curls using bands looped around your ankle. And that wouldn't be a bad option either, because again, we get the all the benefits of band training, which I happen to be a big fan of. having to do with things like overspeed eccentric, stuff like that. So they would actually be a really, really good choice also. Also, you want to do barbell rows. Now, when we talk about barbell rows, what do I mean by the barbell row? I'm talking about the pin lay row, the strict row from the floor, which is generally what you see me doing. I have instructional videos on those. And the reason I say a row from the floor is that, number one, it simulates pulling a weight off the floor. Okay. It also trains your posterior chain to contract isometrically because you're in a fixed position with your torso. Your torso is not moving, and every time you go to reset the weight and pull it back off the floor, you're having to contract your posterior chain isometrically, which is actually the same thing you have to do when you pull yourself in tight for the setup on a conventional deadlift. It also happens to work the entire back. Rows are arguably the best back builder. Before people chime in and say, no, pull-ups, and I'm a fan of pull-ups, guys, don't get me wrong. I think pull-ups are great, especially weighted pull-ups. They do not work the lower back isometrically, and they don't build the upper back as effectively. In other words, things like your traps, rear delts, rhomboids, none of that stuff is worked as effectively on a pull-up as they are on a correctly done row. Okay. The other big advantage, because we're pulling from the floor, we reset on every rep. That means that we can usually get away with not using straps even as you start to get very heavy relative to your strength. The problem you have with a lot of cheat type rows that bodybuilders do, to where they hold on to the weight the whole time, they're just not strong enough to grip it. They use straps, they don't get grip training. The rows are also your first line of grip training. You need a strong grip to deadlift, and for a lot of guys, so you get very strong, if you just do large amounts of barbell rows, it will actually build the grip up that you need to deadlift. Now, I row primarily with an axle bar, which further enhances grip training. But in theory, if you do not have an axle bar, and they're actually quite cheap if you have a home gym, like my axle bar from Titan is only a $70 bar, and that's like free shipping on Amazon Prime. Okay, pretty inexpensive, and it's rated to hold a pretty significant amount of weight. I don't remember what it is, 500 or 600 pounds, something like that. So you're unlikely to damage it. Most of you guys are never going to axle bar lift more than that. But failing that, you could always use fat grips also to get extra grip training on your barbell rows. Okay, because that's really what we need. What is it that we're looking for in a deadlift? What are we looking for? We're looking for erector development, right? Spinal erectors, thoracic erectors. They're critical. We're looking for glute development. We're looking for hamstring development, to a lesser extent, quad development. But if you're squatting already, that's already covered. And we're looking for grip strength, which we're going to get from the rows, particularly if you start doing some rows with an axle bar, back grips, whatever it is that you need to do. We're looking for lat strength. People say, why lat strength? Because being able to pull your lats down and back and maintain scapular retraction out of the bottom of the deadlift is important for tightness. Important for tightness. So essentially what we're looking for is three basic movements that have the potential to build your deadlift up. And now, because these three movements, if you just train them, is this going to get you to an elite deadlift? Is this going to get you to where I'm at? Probably not. But if you're a fairly new lifter, you're kind of stuck at a 300-pound deadlift or something, a 275, putting a lot of focus into these three basic movements, which would be good mornings or good morning variations with large amounts of volume, pin lay rows from the floor, particularly using some that can give you some extra grip work in a perfect world, some sort of direct hamstring exercise that bends the knee. Because again, we don't get that on the good morning. Notice there's very little movement of the knee. It's a hip hinge. And if you combine those three things together, you're going to get what you need to build up a deadlift. And that's going to be, again, full erector development, full posterior chain development, and again, resistant to hamstring tears if you train all three heads of the hamstring, right? Strong lats, good isometric strength in the posterior chain, and strong grip strength. So if we train all of these things and we build all these muscles up, what does that mean? That means that all we really have to do from there is learn how to deadlift heavy, the skill itself. This will build the muscles up of the deadlift though. And if you do that, and I would say for a lot of you out there, if you didn't even deadlift and you did all these things for months and months and months, maybe even a year, and then started deadlifting, I think you'd be shocked at how strong you would be very, very quickly on the deadlift. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.